Welcome to another episode of Indaba the African Debate. My name is Mduduzi Brian, and as always, I have a guest with me today. My guest today is coming from South Africa, and she's a lot of things that you know what? Why should I tell you what she does? She will tell us exactly who she is and what she does. Let's dive in. Robyn Doyle, welcome to the podcast, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Brian.
Amazing. How are you doing? You know what? One thing I never really ask, and I think that's very key to ask, is how are you doing? Especially at a time like this when we are in the midst of a pandemic, and I suspect South Africa is now into its fourth sort of wave with the whole pandemic. How are you? How's everything going? How's South Africa? How's everything there?
So that's a very interesting question. South Africa has been going through a lot in the last few months. South Africans are, to be honest, tired and a little bit exhausted, but as South Africans in our true South African style, we are resilient. South Africa, we're rebuilding from all that has occurred over the past few weeks, but we carrying on in South Africa.
Brilliant. Now, who is Robyn Doyle? What do you do? I think this is why a lot of people will be very interested in today.
So who is Robyn Doyle? That is another interesting question. So Robyn Doyle is a girl from Johannesburg, South Africa. I've went to school and grew up all around Johannesburg. And I went to University of Johannesburg as well. I studied political science. And then over the years, I worked in various different companies, but ultimately I found myself in the International Federation of the Red Cross. I joined the IFRC as the Partnerships and Communications intern. And over the months, I learned a lot. And the opportunity for me to become the interim communications officer arose, and I jumped at it with both hands. And that's where I find myself right now. Currently, I head up the communications department for the IFRC Southern Africa. And I look after 5 countries currently in Southern Africa. So the countries that I currently look after are Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Namibia.
Brilliant. And I'm still trying to learn a lot around the Red Cross, because I think we know that the Red Cross is always available in different humanitarian crises, as we see them quite a lot. But one often doesn't quite understand the major role that they play in all of these humanitarian crises. What is the International Federation of the Red Cross?
So the IFRC is the world's largest humanitarian organization with presence in 192 countries worldwide and 160 million reach of people that we reach. We also spread across those countries is 13 million volunteers, just over 13 million volunteers. And as you asked, what makes us different is that we are there before, during, and after crisis. So our approach to humanitarian aid is deeply rooted in humanity, with our approaches being trying to maintain the dignity and agency of the beneficiaries that we serve. We try to reach every corner of communities. We try to ensure that we work with them in many of the processes so they can recover fully from disasters and emergencies that might occur.
Brilliant.
So yes, that is the International Federation of Red Cross. Yeah.
So, over the past sort of few weeks, we've seen that South Africa has gone through a bit of a turbulent time, so to speak. And I understand throughout these turbulent moments, you were on the ground just after things calmed down a little bit. You were in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal area to be broader. And within that area, what challenges did you guys come across, and what was the aftermath of the turbulence, the disturbances that occurred over the past few weeks?
So one of the major challenges that we saw, as you said, it was a big hit to many communities. And in the communities that we saw, there were a few that the only source of resources in that community was damaged. So one of the major things that we've seen is a rise in food insecurity, a rise in nutritional needs of communities, a rise in inaccessibility of now medical assistance because clinics in those areas were disrupted. So that is a few of the major circumstances that we've seen arise from the unrest. And one of the major groups that were affected were the elderly and the young kids, because as we all know that an elderly girl cannot go and stand in a long line now to get her needs. So oftentimes she goes without because she cannot access it, because she's obviously a lot of the time the only person that can go and the only grown up in the house or that kind of stuff. Also with child-headed households, oftentimes now the kid has to go and stand in a long line. And as we know, grown-ups always tend to ignore kids and push them around and push them out of lines and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So again, oftentimes child-headed households have been hit hardest with this new increase in people using only one store and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think that's a very good point that we often sort of very much neglect, that there's a lot of households that do have elderly people as the head of the household, because a lot of younger people have moved to cities. A lot of younger people have passed on. A lot of different social dynamics have occurred within most families, and as a result, it will leave a grandmother, a grandfather as the head of the household. And I think that that group is very often sort of neglected more often than not, especially in a context where everyone is migrating to the city, trying to look for better opportunities, leaving this massive gap between the rural areas and the city. Do you think, just off the cuff, do you think community projects such as community gardens, community shops are probably the best way of trying to bridge this gap, where we have everything localized within that rural area and say, guys, we have a community garden here for you. We've got a community shop here for you. There's a community clinic that might come in every so often to help alleviate all of these challenges that we see. Of course, this demands a lot of money, a lot of coordination, but is that probably one of the best ways, do you think, to go about this in the near future?
Yes, definitely. So as the Red Cross, it has been one of our approaches to assist communities in the development of these gardens. And the gardens that we do have that have currently been developed and are currently running, we find out being really helpful to the communities, as because they are supplying the local communities' needs, as well as feeding those that cannot afford to go out and buy all the stuff in the garden themselves. So yes, definitely it is one of the approaches that we're using, and approaches that we are finding are working best to empower communities, especially the female communities, the female-led communities and stuff like that, where we find a lot of the time these gardens are sustaining many households, many child-headed households, because plant today, you see what you plant and you're able to reap from that. So yes, we're definitely finding that those types of programs are more sustainable than us just dropping off food parcels. So that is the approach that we're really trying to push, is that make approaches and make humanitarian aid more sustainable for communities.
100%. I fully subscribe to that notion personally, that sustainability is a way of sustenance, because when you leave the community with a very sustainable project, it leads to a process of projections where they know that in the next few years, this is what we're doing. barring any serious issues, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening. And it gives them a projection of sustainability, a projection of sustenance over a long period of time. And,
Definitely.
you know, sometimes I often wonder and think that with the whole pandemic that has occurred, we've seen a serious economic sort of shift, and we've seen economic unrest, so to speak. And when I speak of economic unrest, I'm not essentially speaking about, you know, uh, any level of violence, but the mere fact that someone is going through a period of food insecurity, especially within the cities. How do you guys sort of try and tackle that sort of food insecurity within a city where you can't have most of these community gardens, where you can't have most of these outreach programs that have sustainability and sustenance for a community?
So, as you said, it is a lot more difficult to launch the gardens and that kind of stuff within the city. However, it's not unachievable. We do encourage people to still, in the little places that you do have, try to maintain even a small garden. So, for instance, now the IFRC is launching a Pan-African initiative called the Zero Hunger Campaign, where we are encouraging people to go into gardening, go into sustainable development, where we also do that kind of stuff so that even in the communities, you can make your little bit of money from your garden that you plant in your little area that you have. So as you said, in the community, in cities, it's a lot more difficult to have these gardens, but it's, as I also said, that it's not unachievable. We have quite a few gardens in Johannesburg being run by volunteers in communities. So you just have to take a different approach, but it is doable.
Brilliant. Now, quick fast forward as we look ahead now towards the sort of end of the pandemic, so to speak, if that occurs anytime soon. What programs do you have coming up that you are aware of, and obviously you can share with us, that, you know, missions that you're going to, or any programs that you are launching anytime soon?
So one of the major, there are a few currently being launched, but one of the major ones that we are doing is the Zero Hunger campaign, where we are looking to empower smallholder farmers and connect them to market, so that although you are farming, your produce can also bring you resources instead of it just going to waste. And under that framework, we're also looking to launch the tree initiative, where we are looking to plant 1 million trees in the next year and a half. That will, so that communities can learn the importance of sustainable planting, sustainable forestry, and also to reverse the impact of climate change within communities.
That's
so those are the few that we are.
That's a very good sort of aspect, because I was sort of coming to environmental sustainability as to whether you have any programs along that, because I've seen that to a certain degree within African communities being very generic again, is that we've taken a backseat when it comes to environmental sustainability on a wider scale. Community scale, we see one or two communities being involved in environmental sustainability, but on a broader scale, that is not happening. We see quite a lot of trees being chopped off and not being replanted. We see a lot of rivers running dry because of not being looked after properly, if that's the right term. I don't have any environmental sort of terminology, but along those lines. So I'm very pleased to hear that you guys do have a campaign that is helping environmental sustainability, because I was going to ask, do you guys also focus on that? Is that going to be a major focus for you guys coming over the next few years, seeing that the impact of environmental sustainability is growing rapidly. And the United Nations, of course, has launched goals that help with environmental sustainability.
Mhm. Yes, that is one of our main focuses, especially as the Southern Africa cluster, because as we know, if we do not look after the planet, there's nothing, the disasters will just keep increasing and that kind of stuff, because we also have an approach where we use forecast-based financing so that we prepare for disasters before they happen, so that communities aren't hit as hard as if we were unprepared for those things. So we also know that in Southern Africa, climate change is hitting us perhaps the hardest, or one of the hardest hit regions in the African continent. So yes, all these little things need to be highlighted so that we can create a sustainable approach going forward, and so that people aren't just always caught in the lurch.
Fully understand. And I think, as you're rightly saying, we need to look after the planet way better than we are at the moment. Anything coming up now for Miss Doyle? Anything for Robyn Doyle coming up? Any missions you're going to? Anything worth noting that we can look forward to and say, okay, this is what she's up to nowadays?
Well, I normally post my missions on social media because I'm getting quite a lot of interest of people trying to see where I am. But I know probably in the next few weeks, I'll be going on a mission to one of our countries. I can't say which one, just for security reasons.
Yeah.
But it is quite an exciting one. A beautiful project is being launched by a community for a school. And it's going to be a really exciting one, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Now, just to sort of round us up very briefly, in terms of your forecasting, are you always prepared for disasters across the region, be it environmental disasters, be it social unrest? Are you guys always, to a certain degree, on standby, prepared? What's that like? How's that preparedness like within the community you guys have?
So we always aim to be prepared, because the approach that the Red Cross has is that before, during, and after, the Red Cross is there with communities. Our volunteers are in communities and they are members of communities. So that shows that the approach that we take is community-centered, so that we can be prepared for anything that happens, because we get our assessments directly from the ground. We try to speak to as many people using our volunteers on the ground, so that we know what the community needs and we can go and offer and meet them at those needs, instead of us just saying, oh, this is what people need, but that is actually not exactly what is wanted by the community. So that's how we try to make sure that we are always prepared, or we try to prepare as much as possible for any disaster.
Brilliant. Robyn Doyle, thank you very much for joining us here on Indaba, the African Debate.
Thank you so much. I had a lovely time on your podcast. I hope to be back soon.
Certainly. Of course, there's more that we need to dive into. But no, thank you very much. Her name is Robyn Doyle. I am Duduzi Brian. This is Indaba, the African Debate. And of course, it's been seen for many years that the Red Cross is probably one of the first few societies, one of the first few humanitarian organizations to be on the ground whenever there is a disaster, be it an earthquake, be it social unrest, be it whatever you may think of. It is one of the first few organizations on the ground, and probably one of the most recognizable organizations in this world. Thank you very much for watching. All the best for now.